The planet HFY was nothing more than a graveyard now. Once a thriving colony of the Vexari, an advanced alien race known for their towering crystalline cities, it had been reduced to silence. Blackened ruins stretched across the landscape, the air thick with the scent of burning metal. No bodies remained. There never were any when the Xyrax attacked. They didn't leave corpses. They left nothing. A fleet of ships hovered over the dead world, their hulls gleaming under the dim red sun. The Galactic Council had arrived, too late as always, hoping to salvage answers from destruction. Among them was Dr. Ilara Vos, a xenobiologist who had seen more annihilated civilizations than she cared to count. She stepped onto the scorched ground, her boots crunching over brittle remnants of alien structures. It was always the same, every time. Except this time, there was something different. A distress signal had been detected, weak but unmistakable. It shouldn't have been possible. Every species attacked by the Xyrax perished instantly. They didn't fight. They didn't escape. They simply ceased to exist, erased from reality in a way no one understood. And yet, something had survived here. Someone. Ilara's pulse quickened as she followed the tracking beacon deeper into the ruins. Other scientists and soldiers scanned the area, searching for anomalies. Most of them believed it was a malfunction, a ghost signal from some wrecked piece of technology. But Ilara wasn't so sure. The readings were steady. Whatever was sending the signal was alive. Then she saw him. Half buried beneath a collapsed tower of alien steel was a figure. Humanoid. Breathing. A human male, barely conscious, his face streaked with soot and blood. His uniform, torn and burned, suggested he was a soldier of some kind, but there were no records of human forces on HFY. The shock rippled through the entire team. Humans weren't supposed to be here. More importantly, no one was supposed to survive a Xyrax attack. "Get a medic," Ilara called out, pushing forward. Her hands trembled as she crouched beside the man. His pulse was weak but steady. He shouldn't be alive. He should have vanished like the rest of the Vexari. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment they locked onto hers. "Who?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "You're safe now," Ilara assured him, though she wasn't sure if that was true. The soldiers lifted him onto a stretcher, carrying him toward the waiting ship. The entire team buzzed with quiet panic. This wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. As the ship lifted off, taking the lone survivor away from the ruined world, a question spread through the ranks like wildfire. A question that would shake the foundations of everything they knew about the Xyrax. Why was this human still alive? The medical bay aboard the Galactic Council's flagship was cold and sterile, filled with the quiet hum of machines monitoring the lone survivor. Captain Ryan Carter lay strapped to a diagnostic table, his body still recovering from the trauma of whatever had happened on HFY. His muscles ached, his head throbbed, and every breath felt like dragging air through crushed lungs. But he was alive. And that was the problem. Ilara stood at the foot of the table, arms crossed, staring at the readouts in disbelief. The data made no sense. Every species that Xyrax had encountered was erased in an instant. No remains, no last words, just absolute annihilation. Yet Ryan Carter, a human, had survived. The council demanded answers. Scientists moved around him like vultures, scanning, testing, probing. Blood samples, neural scans, genetic mapping. Every test they could think of, they ran. Ryan barely spoke, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. His mind was fractured, filled with flashes of something he couldn't quite grasp. He remembered fire, screams, the sky turning black, and then nothing. Just silence. Ilara stepped closer, watching as a robotic arm injected another set of nanoprobes into his bloodstream. She expected resistance, but Ryan barely flinched. "You don't ask a lot of questions," she said, studying him. Ryan blinked, his tired eyes locking onto hers. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." His voice was rough, edged with exhaustion. Ilara sighed. "We don't have answers yet, but I need to know. What do you remember about the attack?" Ryan exhaled slowly. He tried to recall, to piece together the missing fragments in his mind. "I was stationed with a small recon unit on HFY. We were investigating rumors that the Vexari had discovered something dangerous." He winced, shaking his head. Then the sky opened up. The Xyrax came. We didn't even get a chance to fight. Ilara leaned in. "You saw them." "The Xyrax." Ryan hesitated. "Not exactly. It's hard to explain. One second, my team was there, and the next, they weren't." His jaw tightened. "They didn't die. They didn't scream. They just vanished, like they were never there at all." Ilara's stomach turned. It matched everything they knew. The Xyrax attack didn't leave bodies. It erased existence itself. "And you," she pressed. Ryan clenched his fists. "I should have been gone too. I felt it. Something trying to pull me apart. My mind, it felt like it was being unraveled, like I was seconds away from vanishing too. But then..." He stopped. Ilara leaned in. "Then what?" Ryan's pulse spiked on the monitors. He swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. It stopped. A cold chill ran through the room. "Stopped," Ilara repeated, her mind racing. "You resisted it." "I don't know how," Ryan admitted. "One moment, I was fading. The next, I was standing in the ruins, alone. It was like something inside me pushed back. Something stronger than whatever that Xyrax were doing." Ilara exchanged glances with the other scientists. That wasn't possible. The Xyrax's method of destruction was absolute. No species, no matter how strong, had ever survived it. Before she could ask more, the alarms blared. Red lights flashed through the medical bay, and the voice of the ship's AI filled the room. "Warning. Unauthorized breach detected. Intruders aboard." Ilara's blood ran cold. She turned toward the reinforced doors just as they began to shake. Something was outside. Something powerful. Ryan struggled against his restraints, his instincts screaming, "Let me out." The scientists backed away in fear, but Ilara moved fast, unlocking the restraints just as the doors exploded inward. A wave of darkness flooded into the room. The air itself seemed to twist, reality bending around an unseen force. The Xyrax had found them. Ryan fell to the floor, barely catching himself. The shadows pulsed, reaching for him. He could feel it again, that same force, trying to pull him apart, trying to erase him. But something deep inside him refused. The darkness recoiled. For the first time in history, a Xyrax attack had failed. Ryan Carter stood up, fists clenched, his heart pounding. He wasn't just immune. He was something more. And the Xyrax knew it. Ilara had never seen the Xyrax hesitate before. Every record, every report, every desperate distress signal from doomed civilizations told the same story. Their attacks were instant, merciless, absolute. They were an unstoppable force, erasing species from existence with no effort. But now, aboard the Galactic Council's flagship, the impossible was happening. Ryan Carter stood in the center of the medical bay, his body tense, breath heavy, as the shadowy force of the Xyrax pulsed through the room. It was trying to consume him, the same way it had erased entire worlds. The walls flickered, reality itself bending under its presence. Scientists and soldiers scrambled for cover, their weapons useless against something that couldn't be fought. Yet, Ryan was still here. The darkness recoiled from him. It wasn't because of shields, weapons, or technology. Something inside him, something no one could explain, was resisting the Xyrax in a way no other species had ever done. Ilara's mind raced. The readings were impossible. His body was unchanged, his vitals stable, yet the Xyrax couldn't erase him. She watched, frozen as the darkness swirled, almost uncertain, like a predator unsure if it had found prey or something far worse. Then, without warning, it struck again. A tendril of pure void lashed out, wrapping around Ryan's arm. A normal being would have been erased instantly, but Ryan didn't vanish. He clenched his jaw, his entire body tensing as the pressure built around him. It felt like being pulled apart molecule by molecule, like an invisible force trying to rip his soul from his body. But it couldn't. Ryan gritted his teeth, pushing back, not physically, but with something deeper, something primal. It wasn't strength or willpower. It was instinct, something buried in his very being, something that Xyrax didn't understand. The tendril snapped back. The darkness shrieked, not with sound, but with a feeling, an unnatural pressure in the air. The ship trembled, the walls groaning under the weight of an unseen force. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the Xyrax vanished. Silence filled the room. The emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows across the wreckage. Scientists gasped for breath. Some collapsed on the floor, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the Xyrax. Soldiers gripped their weapons tightly, though they had done nothing to stop the attack. Ryan stood in the center of it all, fists clenched, chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. He was still here, still alive, and every single person in that room knew what that meant. He wasn't just immune to the Xyrax. He was something else entirely. Ilara stepped forward, her voice unsteady. "You fought it off." Ryan swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know what I did." Ilara studied him carefully, her mind spinning with possibilities. This wasn't just an anomaly. This was a revelation. For centuries, the galaxy had lived in fear of the Xyrax, believing them to be an unstoppable force of destruction. But now, standing before her, was proof that they weren't invincible. Ryan Carter had resisted them, and that the Xyrax were afraid. She turned to the others. "We need to run more tests, deeper scans, neurological mapping, genetic sequencing. We need to understand what makes him different." One of the scientists, still pale from the attack, hesitated. "And if we find out?" Ilara met his gaze, her expression grim. "Then we might have a way to fight back." Ryan let out a breath, shaking his head. "I didn't sign up to be a science experiment." Ilara looked at him, truly looked at him. "I know, but you survived something no one else has. If we don't figure out why, if we don't understand what makes you different, more people will die." Ryan clenched his jaw. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't special. He was just a soldier who had done his duty, who had watched his team get erased while he remained. The thought of going through more tests, more experiments, made his skin crawl. But she was right. If there was even a chance that his survival could help others, he had to find out the truth. Before he could answer, a transmission crackled through the ship's comms. A voice, urgent, and filled with panic. "This is Outpost Helios 9. We are under attack. The Xyrax. Oh God, they're everywhere." The signal cut off. Static filled the air. Ilara's blood ran cold. Helios 9 was one of the last remaining research stations near the galactic core. If it fell, countless lives would be lost, and that Xyrax would be one step closer to total domination. Ryan turned to her. "Looks like we're out of time." Ilara nodded. "Then let's find out what makes you special, before the Xyrax wipe out the rest of us." As the ship prepared for emergency departure, one thought echoed in Ryan's mind. The Xyrax had attacked the research station. But why? Were they trying to stop the truth from coming out? Did they already know the secret behind his survival? Or, worse, were they afraid that humanity was about to discover something even more dangerous? Something buried deep within them. Something that Xyrax had been trying to erase from the universe since the beginning. And now, it was waking up. The journey to Outpost Helios 9 was a tense, silent affair. The ship cut through the void at maximum speed, its engines humming with urgency. Every person on board knew what was waiting for them: a massacre. No one had ever answered a distress call from a Xyrax attack and found survivors. There were never survivors. Ryan Carter sat strapped into a seat in the war room, watching the star maps flicker in front of him. His fingers tapped against the armrest, his mind circling the same thought over and over again. The Xyrax had come for him. That meant they knew something. They knew why he had survived. And yet, he still didn't. Ilara stood at the other end of the room, analyzing the data streaming in from long-range sensors. "The station's energy readings are fluctuating," she muttered. "There's still power, but something's wrong. The core signature is unstable." Ryan glanced at her. "You think they're trying to destroy it?" She shook her head. "If they wanted it gone, it would already be gone." "No, this is different." Her voice was tight with tension. "They don't want to erase this station. They want something inside it." That made Ryan sit up. The Xyrax didn't loot, didn't steal, didn't leave anything behind when they attacked. If they weren't erasing Helios 9, then they were after something specific, something that scared them. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. The sight outside the viewport sent a chill through the crew. Helios 9 was burning. Columns of smoke and fire spewed from the station's shattered hull, its once gleaming metal now blackened and warped. Wreckage floated in the void. Escape pods that hadn't made it far, broken ships that had tried to flee. And in the distance, curling through space like an infection, was the unmistakable darkness of the Xyrax presence. Ilara's breath caught. "We're too late." Ryan stared at the destruction. "No. Look." The others followed his gaze. Beneath the destruction, through the gaps in the ruined station, lights were flickering. Someone was still alive. The realization hit like a jolt of electricity. This wasn't over. The ship moved in closer, dodging floating debris, and locked onto the station's only intact docking bay. Ryan stood, tightening the straps on his suit. He didn't need orders. He was going down there. Ilara moved beside him, already pulling on her gear. "You're not going alone." Ryan smirked slightly. "Didn't think I was." The docking clamps engaged with a heavy thunk, and the doors slid open. The air inside Helios 9 was thin, the artificial gravity barely holding. Sparks rained from broken light panels, and the scent of scorched metal filled the corridors. It was a tomb. Ryan's boots echoed as he moved forward, his weapon raised, Ilara at his side. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Shadows that moved when they shouldn't, whispers that had no source. Then, they found the first body. Or what was left of it. A scientist in a torn lab coat, his face frozen in a silent scream. His body was twisted in an unnatural way, like he had been ripped apart and put back together wrong. His skin shimmered strangely, flickering between solid and translucent. Ilara swallowed hard. They were mid-erasure when something stopped it. Ryan's stomach tightened, or reversed it. Something was very, very wrong. They pushed forward until they reached the station's central research wing. The doors were locked, the emergency power barely keeping the security systems online. Ryan forced the panel open, and the door hissed aside. Inside, a single figure stood among the wreckage, a Xyrax. It wasn't like the shadows they had seen before. This one had taken form, a humanoid shape, its body flickering between a solid black mass and something less defined, less real. Its head turned slowly toward them, two burning white eyes locking onto Ryan. And then it spoke. "You should not exist." The words weren't spoken aloud. They vibrated through the air, pressing into Ryan's skull like an unbearable weight. His vision blurred for a moment, his knees nearly buckling, but he stayed standing. The Xyrax took a slow step forward. "You are a mistake, an anomaly, a threat that should have been erased long ago." Ryan gritted his teeth. "Yeah, then why am I still here?" The Xyrax's form flickered violently, like it was struggling to stay solid. "We do not erase. We correct. We shape the universe as it must be." But you. It took another step. Its voice, a harsh vibration in the air. You are broken. You are wrong. You were never meant to be. A sudden realization hit Ryan like a punch to the gut. You're afraid of me. The Xyrax recoiled. Ilara stared between them. What are you talking about? Ryan's breathing was ragged, his pulse hammering. They don't just erase species because they can. They do it because they have to. Because there's something out there that they can't control. He clenched his fists. And whatever that is, it's in humans. Ilara's eyes widened. That's why you survived. It's not just luck, or genetics, or biology. It's something deeper. The Xyrax's form pulsed with rage. You will not leave this place. The cycle must be maintained. The balance must not break. Ryan took a step forward, standing his ground. Too late. The Xyrax shrieked, its body unraveling into a storm of darkness. The walls trembled, the air distorting. Ryan felt it again. That pressure, that force trying to erase him from existence. But this time, he pushed back. It wasn't strength or willpower or even defiance. It was something else, something buried deep inside him, something that had been waiting. A fire in his very being that refused to go out. The darkness recoiled. The Xyrax screamed, an unnatural, shattering sound that made the walls crack. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it vanished. Ryan stood there, panting, his fists still clenched. The room was silent. Ilara exhaled slowly. Ryan, what the hell are you? He didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing. The Xyrax weren't destroying species at random. They weren't mindless monsters. They were hunting. And for the first time in history, they had failed. The silence in the research wing was suffocating. The Xyrax had vanished, but its presence lingered like a stain on reality itself. The walls still trembled slightly, as if the station itself was recovering from the unnatural force that had just been inside it. Ryan Carter stood in the center of the room, his heart pounding against his ribs. His fists were still clenched, his breath ragged. He could still feel the pressure where that Xyrax had tried to erase him, like a phantom hand gripping his soul. But it hadn't worked. It never worked. Ilara took a slow step forward, her voice careful. Ryan, are you okay? He turned to face her. The expression on her face wasn't just concern. It was something deeper. A mix of fear and curiosity. She had seen what happened. She had seen how that Xyrax reacted to him. How they recoiled. How they ran. Ryan exhaled and forced himself to focus. I'm fine. But we need to find out who else is still alive on this station. Ilara nodded, pushing down her own questions. There would be time for answers later. Right now, they needed to move. They left the ruined lab behind, stepping cautiously into the darkened corridors. The flickering emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows across the walls. The station was silent except for the occasional distant groan of metal shifting under stress. Then, a noise. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Ryan held up a hand, signaling for Ilara to stop. He turned toward the sound, his senses sharp. It was coming from a sealed door at the end of the hallway. He approached carefully, pressing his hand against the control panel. The display was shattered, but the door itself was still powered. Ryan worked quickly, bypassing the broken controls until, with a hiss, the door slid open. Inside was a survivor. A young man in a torn lab coat crouched in the corner, clutching a data pad like his life depended on it. His face was streaked with sweat, his eyes wild with terror. Ryan stepped inside slowly. Hey, you okay? The man flinched at the sound of his voice, his grip tightening on the data pad. Stay back. Ilara moved beside Ryan, her voice gentler. We're here to help. What's your name? The man swallowed hard, his breath shaky. Dr. Vryn. I was on the research team. We were studying. His voice caught in his throat. He shook his head, gripping his temples like he was trying to push away something horrible. Oh God, we shouldn't have. We shouldn't have. Ryan crouched in front of him, keeping his voice calm. Studying what? Vren's eyes darted around the room like he expected something to jump out of the shadows. That Xyrax. We thought they were just destroyers. That they erased civilizations because they were predators, because they were merciless. His hands trembled. But that's not true. That's not true at all. Ilara frowned. Then what is? Vren's gaze locked onto Ryan, his pupils dilating. They erased mistakes. A heavy silence filled the room. Ryan felt a chill creep up his spine. What do you mean, mistakes? Vren's breath came fast and shallow. Everything we've ever assumed about them is wrong. They don't just attack at random. They aren't conquering or feeding. They're correcting something. Something broken in reality itself. He gripped his datapad tighter, his knuckles turning white. And humans, we're the mistake. Ilara stiffened. That doesn't make any sense. Vren let out a broken laugh. Doesn't it? Think about it. No species survives them. No species ever resists them. No species ever fights back. His eyes flicked to Ryan. Except for you. And I know why. Ryan's pulse quickened. Tell me. Vren hesitated, fear flashing across his face. He glanced down at his datapad, then slowly turned the screen toward them. Lines of complex equations and alien symbols filled the display. At first, it meant nothing, just another set of research notes. But then, Ryan saw the pattern. It wasn't just data. It was correction data. The Xyrax weren't just attacking planets. They were rewriting reality itself. Vren pointed to a specific section of the screen. This is what we found. Humans, we're an anomaly. We exist outside the natural equation of the universe. We aren't supposed to be here. His voice dropped to a whisper, and the Xyrax are trying to fix that. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them. Ilara shook her head in disbelief. That's impossible. Humans evolved naturally, just like every other species. Vren laughed again, hollow and bitter. Did we? He jabbed a finger at the screen. That Xyrax's ability to erase civilizations isn't just some advanced weapon. It's reality itself rejecting what doesn't belong. And every species they've erased. They were part of that equation. They fit into the rules. Ryan's stomach twisted. But we don't. Vren's eyes met his, filled with something between awe and horror. No, we don't. And that's why they're afraid of you. Because something in you is stronger than their correction. Ilara took a step back, trying to process the implications. Then, that means humans aren't just another species. Vren nodded, his breath unsteady. It means we're something else entirely. Something outside the rules of the universe. And if the Xyrax can't erase you, if they can't fix the mistake, he swallowed hard. Then we might be the only thing in existence that can destroy them. A deep bone-chilling thrum reverberated through the station. Ryan's head snapped toward the doorway. A dark shape flickered in the corridor beyond. They were here. The Xyrax knew. And this time, they weren't trying to erase him. They were trying to kill him. The air inside Helios 9 seemed to crackle with unseen energy. Ryan Carter felt it in his bones. A pressure, a weight pressing against his existence. That Xyrax were here again, but this time, they weren't lurking in the shadows, testing their ability to erase him. This time, they had come to kill. A deep vibration ran through the metal walls, distorting the light overhead. Ryan saw the flickering darkness just beyond the doorway, shifting like a liquid shadow. That Xyrax weren't walking. They were pouring into the station, moving in ways that defied physics, that defied the natural order of reality itself. Vren let out a choked breath. Oh God, they know we understand. Ryan gritted his teeth. Then we better move. He grabbed Vren by the arm, pulling him to his feet. Ilara was already scanning for an exit, her fingers tapping rapidly on her wrist console. The docking bay is too far, she muttered. We'll never make it. Ryan's mind worked fast. Escape pods. Destroyed. Maintenance tunnels. Ilara shook her head. Some of them lead outside, but the radiation levels from the damage. A low guttural sound vibrated through the air. It wasn't a growl or a hiss. It was something worse. It was wrong. Ryan turned. The shadows in the hallway had stopped moving. And then, as if reality had shattered like glass, they stepped through the walls. The Xyrax weren't bound by physics. They moved like they existed on another plane, passing through solid matter, as if it weren't there. Their bodies flickered between form and absence, stretching and twisting in ways that made Ryan's stomach churn. One of them stepped closer, its white eyes burning like distant stars. "You should not be." It spoke, its voice vibrating through the air, through Ryan's skull, through the station itself. Ryan leveled his weapon at it. "Yeah, tell me something I don't know." The Xyrax didn't stop. It moved forward, the air distorting around it. Ryan fired. The blast from his weapon struck the creature directly in the chest, or where a chest should be, but the energy simply vanished into its body. Absorbed. Consumed. Ryan barely had time to curse before the Xyrax lunged. A split second before it reached him, something inside Ryan reacted. It was like an instinct buried deep in his DNA, something ancient, something primal. His vision blurred for an instant, his muscles tensed. And then that Xyrax recoiled. It didn't touch him. It couldn't. The creature let out a distorted shriek, stumbling backward as if an invisible force had struck it. Its burning white eyes flickered with something Ryan had never seen before. Fear. Ilara's eyes widened. "Ryan, what the hell was that?" He had no answer. The Xyrax twitched violently, its form destabilizing. It was trying to reach him, but it couldn't. It wouldn't. Another one moved forward, but as soon as it got too close, it jerked back as if an invisible barrier had repelled it. Vren gasped. "It's true." Ryan turned to him. "What?" Vren's voice shook. "You're not just immune to them. You're rejecting them. Your existence is pushing them away." The Xyrax trembled violently, their forms flickering in and out of reality. The one that had spoken before locked its burning gaze onto Ryan. "You are the flawed," it said, its voice echoing like a dying star. Ryan clenched his fists. "No, I'm the correction." The station shook. Lights flickered wildly as the entire structure groaned under some unseen force. The Xyrax let out a collective, distorted shriek. And then they vanished. Not fled, not retreated. They were simply gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ilara looked at Ryan, breathing hard. "Okay, now I'm officially freaked out." Vren stared at him like he was staring at something that shouldn't exist. "I was right. You're not just an anomaly. You're something else. Something they can't control." Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, well, I'd really like some answers, because I don't even know what the hell I just did." Vren swallowed. "We need to get back to your ship. I have research data that might explain this. We have to figure out why you." The station shook again. But this time, it wasn't the Xyrax. Ilara's console blared with warnings. "Ryan, we have a problem." Ryan turned to her, bigger than shadow monsters that erase people from reality. Ilara's expression was grim. "Yeah, because the station's self-destruct just activated." Ryan's blood turned to ice. Vren's voice rose in panic. "What? That's impossible. The system was offline." Ilara shook her head. "Not anymore. The core is destabilizing. If we don't get out of here in the next 5 minutes." The overhead speakers crackled to life. A cold, artificial voice filled the station. "Containment failure detected. Initiating full station purge. Destruction in 5 minutes." Ryan clenched his jaw. "They don't just want us dead. They want every trace of what we found gone." Ilara grabbed his arm. "Then we need to run. Now." They sprinted into the corridors, dodging falling debris as the station shook violently. The lights flickered, warning sirens blaring. The air was getting hotter. The reactor core was overheating fast. Ryan turned a corner and nearly skidded to a stop. The docking bay doors were already sealing shut. "Go! Go! Go!" Ilara shouted. They ran full speed, pushing their bodies to the limit. Ryan dove forward, sliding through the narrowing gap just as the massive doors slammed shut behind him. The ship was right in front of them. Vren gasped for breath. "Will your pilot still be?" Before he could finish, the ship's engines roared to life. The hatch opened. A voice crackled over Ryan's earpiece. "I saw the station light up like a dying star. Figured you'd need a lift." Ryan grinned. "Dan right, Mason. Get us out of here." They climbed aboard as the ship's thrusters powered up. The moment the doors sealed behind them, Mason punched the engines to full throttle. The ship blasted out of the docking bay, soaring through space just as the station behind them exploded. A silent, burning inferno consumed Helios 9, erasing everything that had been left behind. Ryan watched from the viewport, his heart still hammering. The answers they needed were gone. The station was gone. But he wasn't. And at Xyrax, they had failed. For the first time in history, something had resisted them. Something had stopped them. Ryan exhaled, staring into the void. Something told him this fight was far from over. Ryan sat in the dimly lit cabin of the ship, his mind racing. The hum of the engines filled the silence, but it did little to calm him. The destruction of Helios 9 was still fresh in his mind. The station, the research, the evidence, all of it was gone. And yet, he was still here. The Xyrax had tried to erase him. Then they had tried to kill him. Both had failed. Vren sat across from him, his hand shaking as he clutched the salvage datapad. The only thing they had managed to save from the wreckage. It wasn't much, but it might hold something. Anything that explained why Ryan was different, why the Xyrax feared him. Ilara stood near the cockpit, arms crossed. She hadn't spoken much since they escaped. Ryan knew she was processing everything, just like he was. Mason's voice crackled over the intercom. "All right, we're clear of the blast zone. No signs of pursuit yet, but I doubt we're out of the woods." Ryan leaned back against the cold metal wall. "We're never out of the woods." Vren let out a nervous laugh. "You're not wrong." His fingers moved over the datapad, scrolling through what little information had survived. His face twisted in frustration. Damn it. The main files were corrupted. Most of the raw data is gone. Ryan frowned. "Anything left?" Vren hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned the screen around. "Just this." Ryan and Ilara leaned in. A single equation filled the display. Ryan didn't understand the symbols, but something about it made his skin crawl. It looked incomplete, as if something was missing. Vren's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is the last piece of our research, the only thing that Xyrax didn't manage to erase." Ilara studied it, her brows furrowed. "What does it mean?" Vren swallowed hard. I don't know. But I think this equation is the reason they fear him." Ryan exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Great, so I'm a walking math problem." Vren shook his head. "No, you're something more, something they don't understand, and that terrifies them." A tense silence settled over the cabin. Then the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared as Mason's voice shouted over the speakers. "Brace yourselves. We've got incoming." Ryan barely had time to react before the ship spun, throwing him sideways. He grabbed onto a railing, his heart slamming against his ribs. "What the hell is it?" Ilara pulled up a holo display. Her face paled. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." A massive rift had opened in space ahead of them. It wasn't a wormhole. It wasn't a jump gate. It was something else. Something wrong. Vren's voice cracked. No, they're coming." Ryan turned toward the viewport and saw them. The Xyrax weren't sending their usual hunters. This time, something bigger was coming through. Something that pulsed with a darkness so deep, so absolute, that it seemed to consume the very fabric of space around it. Mason cursed. I don't know what that is, but I sure as hell don't want to stick around to find out. Ryan didn't either. The ship veered sharply, engines roaring as Mason tried to put as much distance between them and the growing rift. But the darkness wasn't staying in one place. It was expanding. Ilara's console flashed red. It's pulling us in. Ryan grabbed the co-pilot's chair, his mind racing. Can we break free? Mason was already pushing the thrusters to their limit. I'm trying, but it's like gravity doesn't work right near that thing. The ship shuddered, metal groaning under the strain. The rift kept growing, stretching like an open wound in the fabric of reality. And from within it, the Xyrax emerged. But these weren't the same shadowy entities they had seen before. These were bigger, older. Their forms flickered between existence and something else, as if they weren't fully bound by the same reality as everything else. Ryan felt an unnatural chill spread through his body. His very soul seemed to shudder. And then, the voices began. They weren't speaking aloud. They were inside his mind, deep, layered, echoing through every fiber of his being. You do not belong. Ryan clenched his jaw. He had heard them say this before. But this time, something was different. The voice wasn't just condemning him. It was afraid. Vren gasped. They're not trying to erase you anymore. His eyes widened. They're trying to trap you. Ryan's heart pounded. The Xyrax weren't just hunting him. They weren't trying to destroy him outright. They were trying to contain him. The ship trembled as the rift's pull grew stronger. Mason shouted over the alarms. I can't break free. It's dragging us in. Ryan's mind raced. There had to be a way out, some way to fight back. If the Xyrax feared him, if they couldn't erase him, then maybe there was something he could do. He looked at the equation on Vren's datapad. His gut told him it was important, that it was the key. A thought formed, a dangerous, reckless thought. Ryan turned to Vren. You said this equation is incomplete, right? Vren nodded, confused. Yeah, why? Ryan stared at the symbols, something clicking in his mind. The missing piece wasn't data, it was him. He didn't know how he knew. He just did. Without hesitating, he reached out and pressed his palm against the datapad's display. The moment his skin made contact, the symbols shifted. The equation completed itself. The ship stopped shaking. Ilara gasped. Ryan, what did you just? The Xyrax froze. The rift, the ship, the very space around them. Everything went still. The massive entities at the edge of the rift trembled, their forms distorting violently. It was as if something had fundamentally changed. The voices returned, but this time, they weren't speaking to him. Containment. Failure. The flaw. Cannot be. Undone. That Xyrax began to retreat. The rift collapsed. And just like that, they were gone. The ship drifted in silence. Mason let out a shaky breath. What the hell just happened? Vren was staring at Ryan like he had just witnessed something impossible. You completed the equation. But that shouldn't be possible. That's not how math works. That's not how physics works. Ryan exhaled, his body still humming with some unseen force. Yeah, well, maybe that's the point. Maybe we don't work the way anything else does. Ilara ran a hand through her hair. So, what now? Ryan stared out into the endless void. The Xyrax had backed off. For now. But he knew they weren't finished. Whatever he was, whatever made him different, this fight wasn't over. And next time, the Xyrax wouldn't just be afraid. They'd be desperate.